Everybody, and welcome to this presentation on coping after a disaster. I am your host, Dr. Dawn-Elise Snipes. Unfortunately, last night in Middle Tennessee, a ginormous tornado ripped through dozens and dozens of miles. I think they're saying it's like almost 100 miles of Middle Tennessee. So there was a lot of destruction, and I wanted to be able to provide some important points for people to help mitigate some of the stress that people may be experiencing. You're going to experience stress right now. It's just the way it is. There was a lot of destruction and death and catastrophe. However, there are things that we can do to mitigate the psychological and physical impact of this stress on us and our children. One thing to remember is that the longer there's disruption of normal routines, the worse the stress and traumatic reactions will be. We need people to get back to doing their normal routine so they don't start becoming afraid to do those things. For example, a lot of schools were impacted by the tornado that came through last night. And it's going to be important once the schools do reopen for children to start going back to school. And there may be some anxiety that they have about going to school for fear that another tornado will come through when they are at school, and it's going to be important for us to help them address and work through their fears. And I'm going to do an entire video just on helping children deal with distress after a natural disaster. Another thing to remember is that many people are in a state of shock from what they've been through or what they've seen. Unfortunately, this particular disaster occurred in the middle of the night last night. So we may have people that are experiencing distress at going to sleep tonight, or going to sleep for a while after this. We may have people that are experiencing distress when a thunderstorm comes through. And it will be important to recognize that these are very natural reactions to a significant stressor. It's our body saying, hello, we want to survive. We need to be compassionate with ourselves. It's also important to remember that people's reactions vary based upon the size and scope of the disaster. This particular disaster leveled over 50 buildings and caused a wide swath of destruction from the west side of Nashville all the way out to Cookeville, Tennessee. That was pretty huge. And there were thousands and thousands of people that were impacted, thousands of people that are still without power, that weren't able to get up this morning and make their coffee or take a shower. We need to be cognizant that a lot of us and a lot of our colleagues and neighbors and fellow citizens are going through a lot of stress right now. So we may be a little bit more edgy, irritable, or emotional. Another thing that affects the reaction to what has happened is the probability of recurrence. Unfortunately, in Tennessee, the chance of us experiencing another tornado is pretty daggone good. The probability of us experiencing another tornado of the magnitude of the one that occurred last night is not very high. It's important for people to recognize the difference between possibility and probability, and focus on how many years we went without having a major destructive tornado, so they understand and we can conceptualize the fact that there's a small possibility that this could happen again sometime soon. But the probability is we will go for years before something of this magnitude occurs again. And finally, the characteristics of the survivor will affect their reaction. Children are going to have a much stronger and different reaction to the disaster than adults. Children, especially younger children, may have a lot of difficulty understanding that they are now safe. They may have difficulty understanding what happened. Some of the children may have difficulty understanding why all the adults are so upset, especially toddlers and younger children. They sense the stress, they sense the distress, but they're not exactly sure what's going on, and that makes them feel anxious. Older children, school-age children, especially ones that are displaced because their school was destroyed, are going to experience a lot of challenges in the coming months because of having to change their routine a little bit and go to new schools and go back to school facing the fear, like I said earlier, that what would have happened if a tornado would have occurred while I was there. We need to talk with them, reassure them, and help them deal with their anxieties. The elderly may also experience challenges dealing with what's going on if they are mobility impaired, because they may feel like they were trapped and not able to get out of harm's way when that particular tornado came through. There are a lot of things that go into people's stress reactions, but we do need to pay attention to people's physical ability to get out of the way of danger and their cognitive abilities to understand what happened. People who were already in distress, they were depressed, anxious, in recovery from an addiction, actively dealing with an addiction, grieving, anything that made them less than happy and 100% in their emotions is going to mean that this stressor is just one more thing that they're going to have to deal with. They were already somewhat drained from dealing with the other things in their life, and this is one more thing. So it may be more emotional, more overwhelming for them. People's resiliency skills going into a disaster are going to have a huge impact. If they were well rested, well nourished, they had good social supports, they had coping skills that enabled them to deal with the stress effectively, they are probably going to deal with this particular situation better than others who may not have had those things. And in the upcoming videos, I'm going to break it down area by area, and we're going to talk about, for example, physical symptoms of distress after a disaster and what to do to mitigate them, emotional symptoms of distress after a disaster and what to do to mitigate them, etc. I will also do a special video just on working with children. And finally, a person's recovery capital, and that is a ginormous term that basically means what resources you have to deal with the current disaster, your financial resources to repair your house, to get your food, to do whatever you need to do, your emotional resources to deal with distress, your cognitive resources to deal, again, with distress and problem solve, and your social resources to provide you support and to help you feel connected and less isolated. All of those things go into determining how people are going to react in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. Everybody is different, and it's important to be compassionate with yourself. All right, well, thank you for watching. In the next video, we're going to talk about some techniques and some things to be aware of in general for coping after a disaster.